Hello, my name is Marilyn Moore Shaver. I am the author of Cold Hands, Warm Heart, one woman's story of 10 years in the Alaskan wilderness. If you are hearing my voice, you have probably chosen to read the book. If not, you can purchase it as an Amazon Kindle book. To help you visualize our life more fully, I created this slideshow for you to use along with the book. So let's get started. In the book, I told you about the log cabin in Montana that had been a ranger station. This is how it looked when we first bought it. And this was one of the views from our cabin. It was a beautiful place to live, but we were still looking for something a little more remote and wild. This map will give you an idea of how large Alaska is and how far away it is from the main body of the United States. It can be a bit of a shock if you have never considered its size and distance. The purple section of this map is where my story takes place. You will notice the divisions within the state. The purple section is called the interior. Notice how close the peninsula on the west coast of Alaska is to Russia. It's only about 50 miles. The Cold War was still going on then, and the distant early warning stations were on the alert. Locate Fairbanks near the middle of the purple area. Now move southeast a short way on the Richardson Highway until you see North Pole, where we spent our first winter. This is the house we rented and where our second child was born. Not very fancy, but cheap enough to allow us to use our money for getting ready to go out into the bush. You can see the stack of firewood that was needed to get us through the long, cold winter. Lou was seen here before he started growing a beard that would eventually get quite long, as you will see in the upcoming photos. Now back to the map and on to Eagle. Leaving North Pole, continue south along the Richardson Highway until you arrive at Tok. From Tok, turn northeast, go through Chicken, and the road will dead end in Eagle. Going south and then going north took us a long way around, but there are not many roads in Alaska, and if you can't fly, you just have to drive where the roads take you. This is an aerial view of Eagle and the Yukon River. Pretty impressive, isn't it? You can see a landing strip on the left that allowed the mail plane to land once a week. On the right is the Taylor Highway. Our first winter was spent 12 miles out of town on that road. The next two were spent 8 miles upriver at a spot known to the locals as Boundary, since it is very close to the Canadian border. The river runs from right to left on the photo, so our cabin was 8 miles right of this spot. I've lost some photos of Gravel Gulch, but if you look past the girls and me, you will look down into the gulch. There is ice covering the stream at the bottom. The sled you see is the first dog sled Lou made for his trap line. You will note the size of the trees, the result of the ground being permanently frozen all year round, or what is called permafrost, and the fact that we were fairly high above sea level. I guess I was more interested in taking photos of the kids than I was of the cabin, but if you look in the upper left-hand corner of the photo, you can just see Lou walking away with a pack on his back. These photos were taken in the spring after the sun had come back, giving us enough light to use our little Instamatic camera. The following spring shows us living in a little shack we had built to use in the summers in town, so Lou could work for the Bureau of Land Management and get us ready for another winter of trapping and hunting. This is Loopy, the female pup we got for breeding sled dogs. She was great at having puppies, but she never would lean in and pull her share of the load. Maybe she thought that a dog who was that pretty and produced puppies shouldn't have to work. The beaded strip I made one winter to go around the hem and cuffs of a fur parka. A closer look at beadwork on a pin I made. A family portrait with our little chicks. After 3 years near Eagle, our boats are lashed together and ready for the 700-mile journey down the Yukon. Our canoe is behind the boat, so you can barely see it. It amazes me now to think that we were ready and eager to just jump in our boats and head off into the unknown. We camped on open sandy or rocky places along the way where the wind would keep the mosquitoes away. This is our tent life when we reached Tanana and camped downriver from the village for several weeks. Here we are playing in the canoe, which I used to take fish out of the net while we were camped there, and in one of our boats. The tall guy is Mike Potter from Detroit, Michigan, with whom we made friends during that summer. Looking for adventure himself, he asked if he could accompany Lou to the final destination on the Nowitna. They would cover about 180 miles on that trip. 100 of those miles would be against the current. The girls and I would fly in. This old cabin would be our home. It had been empty for many years, but was still habitable. In fact, it was very welcoming. If you look on the cabin wall behind my daughter, you will see a bear hide someone stretched out and left nailed there. On the roof is a homemade canoe covered with canvas. Since my daughter is only 3 in this photo, you get an idea of how low the cabin roof is. In my book, I make frequent references to Glenn Gregory and his family. Here he is with his wife and 3 of his children on one of their visits. Glenn on the left with his plane and a passenger on the gravel bar a little ways upriver where he landed in the summer. Behind Lou is our good friend Fred Audie. And here is Fred with his float plane. The first time he flew in, he must have forgotten he was on the side of the river where the water is deeper. He stepped off his floats and got a surprise. We were careful not to laugh so he would not feel any more embarrassed than he already was. But it was pretty funny. This is what we call breakup. The ice gets rotten, meaning it gets structurally weak like honeycomb, and begins to move downriver in chunks. Of course, this was nothing like breakup on the Yukon, but still interesting to watch. All the tributary rivers broke up, putting pressure on the Yukon River until it all let loose and made its way to the Bering Sea. We came close to getting flooded that year, but as you read in the book, it got worse than this some years. You will see we put some of our stuff on the cabin roof so it wouldn't float away if the water got too high. The summer after the ice jammed and eroded the bank in front of our cabin, we started building a new one further back from the river. Lou's health kept us from getting any more than this done that year. Fortunately, we were able to move back into our old cabin for the winter. The following spring, we continued construction by tearing down the old cabin and moving it log by log over the snow to the new site. The days were warm and perfect for working. We slept in our tent while we rebuilt the cabin. Happily, Lou was able to do the hard work required this time. And here's the finished cabin. After Nathan was born, we needed more space and added a room onto the back of the cabin. Lou bought a device which he attached to his chainsaw that allowed him to cut floorboards for the addition to the cabin. This is the completed cabin in summer and in winter. In my book, I talk about caches. Here you see 2 of them. The closer one we built. The one further back was built by a former owner. A closer look at the cache we built with Rebecca on the ladder. Notice the autumn colors on the trees behind the cache. Colors were brilliant but short-lived. A view of the cabin from inside. You can see all the poles we cut and peeled for the roof, and the window I mentioned in the book that we covered with plastic because it had no glass. The lighter logs on the wall are new ones we used to replace those that were no longer sound. This table was our gathering spot. It's where we ate our meals, studied and read, and completed hobby projects. The lamp was our only source of light, so naturally we gravitated toward the table for anything we wanted to do requiring light. It was family togetherness of necessity, you might say. And here we are seated at the table. Debbie is sitting next to Lou and Rebecca is next to me. It's easy to miss that I am holding Nathan on my lap. Before his first trapping season on the Novi, Lou needed to make another dog sled. You can see here he is slowly planing down logs to make boards for the sled. Lou going off to work with the dog team. Debbie is further up the slope. Mickey and Spooky are ready to go, but you will notice Loopy is lying down. I told you she didn't pull her share of the load. Here you see one of Loopy's pups. You can see the resemblance. The pup is sitting on a frozen moose hide. In the background, notice the rack with the dried fish on it. You will see this wooden frame in another picture when it is covered with a canvas tent to turn it into a smokehouse for fish and meat. A typical view of the trapline trail Lou followed. Lou with a lynx he trapped. Notice the frost on Lou's beard. This shows Lou with a season's catch of marten, called sable in the fur trade, and with a wolf. A moose Lou bagged one fall. You can see Lou is straining to hold up a big northern pike. He was telling me to hurry up and shoot. And Debbie caught this one with a rod and reel. You will remember the story in the book about a bear looking in our window as we ate lunch. We ended up eating the bear. Bears were the biggest danger we faced during the warm months when they weren't in hibernation. In this photo, I am cutting moose meat into strips to hang into the tent for smoking. The smoke will keep the flies away and help preserve the meat. It's not cold enough to freeze the meat, so this is a necessary measure. I talk about our garden and how it produced enough food to get us through until the following harvest. This gives you an idea of the size. That's our daughter Rebecca in the shot. I am stretching moose hide to work in the tanning solution. The socks pulled up over my pant cuffs prevent mosquitoes from going up my leg and biting me. The finished hides are smoked for a few days. The girls at work. Debbie is washing dishes and Rebecca is mixing powdered milk. When they were grown, they were glad we had taught them to work. I am merely posing for this photo with a chainsaw. Actually, Lou usually did the sawing himself. This is the crib I made for Nathan before he was born. I used small trees for the poles and stuffed moose hair into the bags sewn together that once held wheat. Nathan, in an infant seat, I made him from some boards we had around. Lou was displaying lamps he made out of diamond willow. That year was especially bad for mosquitoes. We gave in and wore netting over our heads. I told you of our excitement looking for mastodon tusks. You can see the chunks we found one year. They don't look like much here, but in the next photo they are cut and polished for earrings and necklaces. This is a view looking downriver in summer, and this is the same view in winter. The sun is returning. We still can't see it, but its rays are shining on the trees. It is sometime in early February. And here's another shot, and one more shot. Lou with his broken leg waiting for me to get help. The helicopter coming to pick him up. And here he is back home with crutches. Mike Potter and Debbie the year he came out to help us after Lou broke his leg. This is Glenn's plane just before it got into trouble with the rising water. Fortunately, the water receded before it did any damage. Remember the story of the guy who tried to land in the sand and flipped his plane over? Well, this is it. Fortunately, he escaped without injury. This is the barge Bob and Sean brought upriver each spring to do some mining. And this is one more family portrait. This is the parting shot, as they say. Fred has made the long trip out by boat so he can transport us and the few possessions we will be taking with us as we close this chapter of our lives. Just looking at it now gives me a lump in my throat. But it was time to go. This is a photo of our cabin that I found recently when I Googled Nowitna River images. At first I couldn't believe it could be our cabin, and I kept comparing it to photos I had taken when we lived there. But sure enough, the trees are larger, of course, but everything else is pretty much as we left it. I was so excited to realize it was our cabin, it took my breath away. There was a sign on the door, but I can't read it, so I don't know if there is a permanent resident living there or not. If there is, I hope they enjoy being there as much as we did. Well, this is the end of my slideshow. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching.